I am your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I am joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander, who's back on the crispy, high quality ASMR mic. Tommy, tis the season for hypothetical trade packages, tisn't it?
Tis.
Tis it is. um, so, in today's episode, I want to talk about this is going to be another one of those standalone evergreen holiday Lakers Legacy podcast episodes. In today's episode, I want to talk about not the high level trade that the Lakers may potentially make with their premier first round pick. I want to talk about the part one trade, the precursor trade to that trade. And what I mean by that is in 2023, before the Lakers traded Russell Westbrook for D'Angelo Russell, Jared Vanderbilt, and Malik Beasley, along with the 2027 first, they first did the Rui Hachimura trade. Kendrick Nunn, 3 seconds for Rui. So in today's episode, we are going to talk about that part one marginal trade. And we are mainly going to be using Gabe Vincent and the lot of the Lakers expirings, plus several seconds. So let's assume at this point that Rob Pelinka does a part one trade without using D'Angelo Russell and or Rui's salary and the first round pick. And we are working with Gabe Vincent's $11 million, couple second round picks, and the expirings of JHS, $3.8 million, Christian Wood, $3 million, Jackson Hayes, $2.4 million. Add all those up together, and that's $9.2 million in expirings and one more year of Gabe Vincent at $11 million next year, who a team could presumably reflip. And then you've obviously also got Cam Reddish's expiring, but I think from prior episodes, we've mentioned that we would prefer not to put Cam Reddish in a throw-in deal. So we'll leave it to JHS, Wood, Hayes as the expirings. And then we also have Maxwell Lewis as a potential sweetener. His deal runs like 2 more years, but it's at like 1.8 to $2 million. And yeah, Maxwell Lewis could be a potential sweetener in any deal as well. So what can the Lakers get for these assortment of players in a marginal deal with no first round picks? I'm going to leave out some oft talked about names like Jonas Valanciunas, Robert Williams, Nick Richards, Day'Ron Sharpe, because we have already talked about these dudes ad nauseum. I'm also going to leave out guys like Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson, et cetera, et cetera. So, Tommy, I have some options for you of literal marginal side deals for role players / starter quality players, and I want to get your thoughts on them. So yeah, a lot of these deals will involve multiple players that will make the deal seem unlikely, but just assume that these deals will get done with a third or fourth team and don't get too hung up on the logistics. So with that said, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, number one, let's do Jalen Hood-Schifino and Christian Wood and a second. That's $6.8 million outgoing to the Chicago Bulls for Torrey Craig, who's only making $2.8 million expiring. So the Lakers would actually save $4 million in this deal, get further under the first apron, while getting a solid wing defender back and opening up a roster spot to sign someone else. Torrey Craig is 33 years old. He is 6'5" with a 6'8" wingspan, but he is built very sturdily. Really solid, versatile defender who has known his role for the past couple of years now. I remember we were talking about him as like a free agent target like 2 years ago when he was with Indiana, but he eventually wound up with the Phoenix Suns. He's a good rebounder for a guard and wing, and overall he's just like a professional 3-and-D guard / wing. So your thoughts on Torrey Craig?
Yeah, I would definitely do this trade. I mean, Torrey Craig feels like an obvious need for us and replaces 2 guys who were giving us 0. But the bigger thing, almost than that, which is already a big thing, right? But the bigger thing is by pushing us 4 million further below the apron and creating a roster spot, it kind of gives us a little more flexibility with what we do in other trades because we don't have to match 1 for 1. Whereas right now we're like 30, I think we're 30K or 15K. I mean, it's like we're so close below the second apron that if we do any trade, we have to be taking back less money, as we are in this example, or exactly 1 for 1 dollar matching, which is super hard to do. So yeah, I think I would do it almost exclusively for that reason. But then, like, the fact that he's better than could give us something more than JHS and Wood right now is also very helpful.
Yeah, and I feel like this is like a deal that is so easy to get done. Like, what reason do the Bulls have to hold on to Torrey Craig's $2.8 million deal? I would only say the only reason why you would oppose this deal is if there were you can probably come up with like several other deals for players that are better than Torrey Craig, right? That would be the only reason. But as a last resort sort of thing, I would not mind Torrey Craig on the Lakers. All right, moving on to the next deal that I have lined up, and let's talk about one of Torrey Craig's teammates on the Chicago Bulls. Let's do JHS, Christian Wood, and Maxwell Lewis. That is $8.6 million outgoing to the Chicago Bulls for power forward slash center Jalen Smith. He is making $8.5 million this year, around $9 million the next 2 years. So in this scenario, I don't anticipate any seconds going out because the Bulls would do it for JHS and Maxwell Lewis flyers, and they would get off Jalen Smith's 3-year contract, even though they signed him this summer to that contract. But Jalen Smith is still only 24 years old, 6'9" with a 7'2" wingspan. I kind of liken Jalen Smith to like being a more athletic, stronger, better defending Thomas Bryant, or like the more century version of Christian Wood. He's strong, he's explosive, really good finisher in the paint, can also stretch the floor. He's been knocking down threes left and right, and overall I just really like his energy and motor. I love how explosive he gets off of the ground to hammer dunks through, but also how explosive he gets off the ground to challenge guys' shots at the rim as well. And at the end of the day, I know he'll run the floor, hustle, and do all the dirty work things for you while still being able to be a plus on the offensive end of the floor as well. And I think what the Lakers lack that Jalen Smith has is just that infusion of athleticism and energy. So your thoughts on JHS Wood, Maxwell Lewis, and Jalen Smith. And I want to be clear, I feel like you're just going to say yes to every one of these scenarios because it's a rhetorical question. I'm pretty much trading nothing for something, but you give me your thoughts on Jalen Smith, I guess.
So yeah, you're right. I am going to say yes to this one. I think, I think the point you made that I really like is he's sort of what this roster needs Christian Wood to be. And I don't know that Christian Wood would have gotten there, but you know, and I will caveat all of what I'm about to say by like Jalen Smith has actually improved quite a bit as a 3-point shooter
Mm-hmm.
since he's been in the NBA. But you know, you're losing a little bit of offense from what Wood would give you, but you're gaining so much on the other side of the floor. Jalen Smith is one of these guys who, if you haven't watched him, I put myself in this category until you started bringing him up all the time. But if you haven't watched him, you look at the paper and you're like, all right, 6'9", 7'2" wingspan. I guess like he's going to be one of these guys who's like a little bit too small to play center, but not like, skilled enough in the modern NBA to be a true four. So like, how does he fit? But he does have some skills. Like, I mean, he's a lot stronger than a Christian Wood, for example. So he can actually use that length. He can absorb some contact and use that length to protect the paint. He gets really good rebounds. Last year, I'm just looking at his numbers right now. He's averaged 6 rebounds a game the last couple of years. The year before that, he played slightly more minutes, averaged almost 8 rebounds a game. This year, he's averaging 5 in 15 minutes. I mean, that's like
Yep.
more than, or 14 minutes. That's like, more than a lot of our guys are averaging in more minutes. So, I think this is like, I'm going to put this in the bucket of, I don't know. It's not fair to say in this example, but because we are trading kind of guys who aren't helping for a guy who could help, but there are going to be presumably some examples that you're about to give where we may actually be trading overall better players than we're receiving, but we need to do it for better fits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jalen Smith would be a good fit. I think he could play with AD, without AD, kind of the way we were planning to hopefully use Wood. And he doesn't command so many minutes such that, you could go get still like a big bruising center to kind of round out the roster balance. Even a guy like a Jonas Valanciunas and use him situationally, use Jalen Smith situationally. Maybe you're paying a lot for the front court, but again, I think Jalen Smith's ability to play with AD could change that outlook a little. I mean, honestly, both of those guys I just named could play with AD, which I think helps.
Yeah, and the thing I like about most about Jalen Smith is like if you gave Christian Wood like explosive hops, it's like almost fusing Jackson Hayes with Christian Wood a little bit. So yeah, I would definitely do it for Jalen Smith. You would too. Okay, my third
Jalen
trade
Smith
here,
Shafino.
Jalen Smith Shafino. We trade Jalen Hood Shafino for Jalen Smith Shafino. Okay, this one, third one, Gabe Vincent, JHS, and a second for, and we're going to give that package to the Washington Wizards for Jonas Rashawn Holmes. So it's funny because I feel like Rashawn Holmes has gone so much under the radar the last couple of years, mainly because when he was with the Sacramento Kings, he like he sat out like half the season because of like a defamation case from like a domestic, like domestic violence like case with his wife that turned out to be false or whatever. And now he's like suing her. Anyways, all that to say, Rashawn Holmes' career kind of got derailed by that year. And ever since then, he's kind of been trying to find his way back. And from what we remember of Rashawn Holmes, like he was really good, and his like prime stats with the Sacramento Kings were like 14 points, 8 rebounds, almost 2 blocks a game. He could kind of do everything. Now he's a little undersized at 6'9" as well, and I almost liken him a little bit to the he was like the OG Jalen Smith, Tommy.
Mhm.
But I bring up Rashawn Holmes because everybody has been so focused on Jonas Valanciunas, Jonas Valanciunas. Let's get Jonas Valanciunas, and to some extent, I agree. I would like to have a big burly body, but at the same time, if that's all we're relying on for our backup front line, I don't like it. I don't like the slow foot speed. I would actually prefer to have athleticism, explosiveness, a guy who can run up and down the floor, and that is Rashawn Holmes. That is Jalen Smith, but that is also Rashawn Holmes. He is making $12.6 million this year and a non-guaranteed $13 million next year. So he's essentially an expiring, and the Washington Wizards sign him to this contract to essentially flip him. And so if we trade Gabe, JHS in a second for Rashawn Holmes, that's $14.8 million outgoing for $12.6 million incoming. The Lakers would save $2.2 million and open up a roster spot. Rashawn Holmes is 31 years old, 6'9" with a 7'1" wingspan, very athletic, very bouncy athlete, even at this age. Great pick and roll man and lob threat, good motor and energy, and he has good mobility as well. So your thoughts on Rashawn Holmes?
So I think what this one is tough because again, it's like yeah, on the one hand, anyone is going to be a help, over the package that we're proposing here. The thing that's interesting and maybe a little scary about Rashawn Holmes, right? It's like you mentioned that breakout season he sort of had with the Kings. Follow that up with another really efficient, solid half season or so, and then another like half season where he didn't really play. We're now at the point where he hasn't really played in like, a couple years. And so the problem with that is that's a lot of time to be sitting on the bench. I mean, he appeared in less than half the games the last 2 years. He's only appeared in 2 games so far this year. You just wonder how much is left. It's like on the one hand, you figure if he can get anything, back to anything close to what he was with the Kings in circa 2020 or so, this is a huge win. But I think, you could just get a guy who is just sort of riding out the end of his career. It's hard to say. He's 31. He's sort of past the time that, is he going to continue to develop? Like he is who he is at this point, and he hasn't had a lot of on court reps. And so you just wonder, like mentally, where's a guy like that? And so that would be my concern. Is yeah, we're not trading anyone useful, but are we getting back anyone useful, or are we just getting back like another type of guy who, okay, this is why he's sort of been floating around at the end of benches for the past couple of years. We just don't know. And again, it's like looking at his tape from 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it's like, yeah, this is the type of guy we need. But I just don't know that that's who
Yeah.
we're getting right now. And I don't know that anybody can really know because he hasn't really played.
Yeah, that's fair. It's almost like taking on like a rehabilitation project. And even though he's been healthy all these last 3 years, he like to your point, he hasn't had the reps. It's almost like a Christian Coloco sort of deal. Yeah, I would say obviously he's probably like 5 rungs below Jalen Smith because he's older and he hasn't had the reps. You don't know what he's been like, what he's going to be like in competitive situations. I did watch some of his tape from Washington last year, albeit he only played like what 2 games, but he still looked pretty athletic. And I mean, he played last year as well. Oh, I watched some tape from his last year with Washington, actually. Played 17 games, still looks very athletic. So, I mean, if you can tell me that Rashawn Holmes is still like physically able to do everything he did back in 2020, like I would sign up for that instantly. But yeah, to your point, there are more question marks and concerns than a guy like there are more question marks and concerns with a guy like Rashawn Holmes than there are with a guy like Jalen Smith. But just a name to sort of think about and monitor as well. All right, so we're down to our last 3 names, but before we get to that, Tommy, it's a dog eat dog world out there. But do you know what's better than a dog eat dog world?
What?
An underdog eat dog world,
Oh,
especially when it comes to fantasy sports betting. Underdog is the place to play if you're a sports fan looking to win money while watching sports. Compete against other players just by selecting higher or lower on 2 or more players' stats, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. If you want to flex your way into the betting discussion like I have, download the Underdog app, sign up, and use code LEGACY and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Again, download the Underdog app, sign up, and use code LEGACY and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Higher or lower, you make the call. Turn every JJ Redick broken clipboard into a win with Underdog. Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama, Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467369. All right, so we are back. We are down to our last 3 trade packages. Let's move on to number 4. Tommy, let's do JHS, Christian Wood, Jackson Hayes, Maxwell Lewis. That is $11 million expiring, outgoing. Or actually, I think it's like $9 million, $10 million expiring, and Maxwell Lewis outgoing. And we're going to send that package to the Atlanta Hawks for former Laker Larry Nance. Lance Nance making $11.2 million, 31 years old, 6'8 with a 7'2 wingspan. He's mobile, he's agile, he runs the floor well, still super athletic. And with Vando's status in perpetual doubt moving forward, we kind of need to replace Vando's infusion of athleticism, rebounding, and energy. And while Larry Nance is not the same point of attack perimeter defender that Vando is, he can do all those other stuff: rebounding, energy, athleticism, and he can space the floor better than Jared Vanderbilt in recent years. So, your thoughts on bringing Larry Nance back to the Lakers?
definitely bring Lance Nance back. I think the interesting thing about him is, he's not the same. I mean, you mentioned the Vando point of attack defense. We do lose that. Um, he's not the same guy that he was athletically, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, but he's only 31 years old. He can still like explode off the ground. He still, has that famous wingspan and standing reach that got him drafted by us in the first place. I can't remember who made the comment. Maybe it was, I can't, it was still Mitch, I think, at the time. Compared him to like an old school center who like he doesn't look that tall, but when he puts his arms up, they're almost at the rim. And I'm butchering the story, but you get the idea for those people. Maybe there's some nostalgia there. Those of you who remember that, but his numbers don't like flash in terms of like being a rim protector, but he's such a smart player and such a has such good hands, and is willing to do like the sort of dirty work that he is like so obviously to me a fit on this roster.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a big time threat to shoot threes volume wise. He can actually hit an occasional outside shot. He's a career 35%, again, low volume. Most of the years of his career, he's only averaged like 1 attempt per game. But he's a threat enough that you have to go out there, or at least like look at him. And that's a good skill to have because on the flip side, he can do a lot of things with the ball as a passer and playmaker and screener, and he knows how to get guys in the right position. He's had multiple years in his career where he's averaged over 3 assists. And so, I just he very, very clearly fits, and I would definitely do a trade to get him. I think he's the type of guy who you don't really he's sort of floating under the radar. He's only playing 15 minutes for the Hawks. He hasn't even appeared in every game.
Yep.
Even when healthy, they've sometimes just benched him. I because of like, the depth and young with the other young guys they have. He's not really on the timeline as most of the rest of that same timeline as most of the rest of that roster. This seems like the sort of classic case where this is the type of guy who gets picked up on an expiring contract by like a pseudo contender and becomes like a core rotational player come playoff
Yep.
time. And everyone's like, how did we miss this? And I really, really see that with Nance. Mostly because of his intelligence. It's like
Yep.
you can plug him into JJ's system. He is going to know what to do. He can be a hub. He can be a, real good screen setter. He's going to know where he's supposed to, he's going to pick it up really quickly. And then, yeah, defensively, again, it's like he's not a rim protector, but he can play with spacing bigs. He would actually, again, we talked a little bit about Jonas, but he would be a really good complement to Jonas because of his speed and
Yeah.
quickness. And the fact that Jonas can spread the floor offensively. And so, Nance can operate more in areas he's comfortable with. I would really seriously be looking at things like this. And
Yeah.
I hope that this is on Rob's radar because this is like not a name that has come up. But on the flip side, as we've seen with Rob in the past, like for all the things that tend to leak about the Lakers, it seems like his trades are things that he keeps super, super close to the vest. I mean, none of us saw that Patrick Beverly for Mo Bamba trade. Like none of us saw the Rui trade coming.
Yep.
The Westbrook trade, of course, was talked about for a year and a half. But even when that came to fruition, it wasn't the trade that most of us thought. I mean, it was a 3-team trade that landed us D'Angelo Russell. So it's like, he's always got like a little, kind of secrecy to him. And maybe the fact that we haven't heard Nance is a good sign. But
Yeah.
yeah, Nance is a guy, again, not one guy that completely changes the makeup of your team, but this is the mold that we're missing. And you add two other guys who are kind of like him, and I think you can completely flip that defense, at least from being like, literally one of the worst in the entire league, like bottom three, to maybe more middle of the pack.
Yeah, I feel like Larry Nance is almost like the he's like a connective player on both ends of the floor. He's like Alex Caruso at the power forward position. And I feel like he would be like a rising tides lifts all boats sort of defensive cog coming off of the bench that can play with the bench units, can play with the starters, can close some games. And so, yeah, I like Larry Nance's fit on pretty much every level. And yeah, hopefully Rob is doing his work. Luckily, we know that Rob Pelinka knows who Larry Nance is. So yeah, there's there's Larry Nance Jr. Let's hope for the reunion. Moving on to number 5, let's do Jalen Hood-Schifino, Christian Wood, Jackson Hayes, Maxwell Lewis. That's $11 million outgoing, and let's send them to the Toronto Raptors for Chris Boucher, $10.8 million expiring. So Chris Boucher, kind of like Larry Nance, but a little bit different. For me, Chris Boucher is like the one-for-one replacement that I can see out there that kind of mirrors Vanderbilt's freakish length the best. He's like the version of Vanderbilt that can actually space the floor and shoot threes, though. He is a slightly less of a rabid point of attack defender than Vando, but I think he's a better perimeter defender than Larry Nance is. But the thing that he's better than Vando at, and even better than Larry Nance in, is just rim protection. Actually, you wouldn't think so because Chris Boucher is very like frail and scrawny, but he really, as the weak side shot blocker, and even when it comes to defending his own man off the dribble, historically he has been a really good shot blocking sort of like wing forward who's like he's had seasons where he's averaged like 2 blocks a game at some points. And yeah, he's just a guy who really knows how to leverage his insane 7'4" wingspan to bother opposing players on jump shots and at the rim. And he's also very versatile offensively, can put the ball on the floor. He's hitting like fadeaway turnaround jump shots. Not that you want him to do that, but he does have a bag. But most of all, he's like a reliable spacer. And again, for me, if we know that we can't count on Jared Vanderbilt, for me, Chris Boucher is sort of like the closest proximity to a freakishly lanky sort of player that can kind of do the things that Jared Vanderbilt can do. Some things he can do better, some things he can't do better in terms of playmaking and point of attack defense. But everything else, and he's been killing it with the Toronto Raptors this year in very limited minutes. So, yeah, your thoughts on Chris Boucher?
Chris Boucher seems like an obvious one for me. I don't. It's interesting because it's like you don't hear too many people talking about this guy, and then like you look at the numbers, and yeah, he's not the most efficient perimeter shooter, but he's a threat. He can hit free throws. He gets rebounds. He can do like a little bit of everything. He can use his length to block shots. Again kind of liken him more to like a in that Jalen Smith mode as like a maybe more athletic version of what we were hoping Christian would be for us.
Yeah,
I think the question is, yeah, I think you can figure out a way to make him fit and play him on this type of roster. I mean, he has had years in the past where he's hit in the high. I guess maybe just one year. But he had a year where he hit a higher, in the higher 30s from
mm,
three, which would be maybe make him a little more attractive. Um, Ultimately, it comes down to like what it ends up costing. I think the package you put out is fine, but if we end up having to bid, this feels like a type of guy who you might have to bid for a little bit, right? It's like he's an expiring, so it's not going to cost a first round pick, but you wish we had like the slightly better flyers maybe for Orlando to take a look at, and
Toronto.
then, or excuse me, Toronto to take a look at, because they're obviously rebuilding. So, but yeah, I like Boucher, and I'm surprised he's actually not talked about more.
And I'm surprised he's not talked about more by the fan base because, like, Rob Pelinka has actually tried to literally trade for Chris Boucher in the past. If you remember all those THT for Kyle Lowry overtures, Chris Boucher was typically in the trade package along with, and looking back on it, we should have absolutely done that trade. But yeah, so this is a name that Rob Pelinka is also very familiar with. So I would not be surprised if he went back to this Chris Boucher well. Also, one thing that I forgot to mention about Larry Nance is this year, in this season alone, and even in the limited games that he's played, Larry Nance has a game where he's hit 3 threes, as well as a game where he's hit 5 threes. So he's really improved 3-point shooting wise. He's never going to be a high volume shooter, but you definitely have to respect him from out there. That's my last. That's my little Larry Nance addendum. Okay, for the last trade in this episode, Tommy, we're going to stick with the Toronto Raptors with one of Chris Boucher's teammates, and we're going to give up Gabe Vincent, JHS, maybe Maxwell Lewis, and 2 seconds. That's like $14.8 million outgoing. If you tack on Maxwell Lewis, that's like, I don't know, 16.6. But we're going to send that package to the Toronto Raptors for Kelly Olynyk, $12.8 million this year, $13.4 million next year. He hasn't played this year, or at least not when this episode is being recorded. He's been out for a little bit, but provided he's healthy. In this deal, Toronto takes on Gabe's contract for us, obviously, which is a big deal, which is why we give them 3 seconds, but we also give them a flyer on JHS, a flyer on Maxwell Lewis. And JHS, by the way, is a player that the Toronto Raptors actually really liked in the draft, and there was questions of whether or not they would pick him as high as number 13. So trade logistics aside, though, what are your thoughts on Kelly Olynyk? Because for me, I understand why everybody wants Jonas Valanciunas. But if I had my druthers, if forced to pick between a guy like Jonas and Kelly Olynyk, I would pick Olynyk because I feel like he's the perfect 5-out center cog on this team and for JJ Redick. He's a solid enough defender and rebounder, but he is a much better playmaker. He is a much better outside shooter. And he's actually like, for better or for worse, a pretty tough player as well. I mean, people know that he's been pretty dirty in the past with like the Kevin Love antics and whatever, but he's not a slouch defensively, is what I'm saying. So, your thoughts on he's called the lunch lady. I think one of his nicknames is the lunch lady because his hair is like always up in a bun or whatever. And I guess he looks like a lunch lady. But yeah, your thoughts on Kelly Olynyk?
Kelly Olynyk, I would definitely take. I mean, look, the Kevin Love stuff and that was one incident. It was to me, even at the time. I mean, I have to go back and watch the tape. It's been so long, but I feel
It's like
like
2015 or something.
yeah, it is like probably unintentional. Guys get hooked up in weird positions all the time, and Olynyk is. I think the thing about Olynyk is he's like weirdly strong.
Yeah.
And I say weirdly because he doesn't look like he should be strong, and then like you can't move him. He's almost like to me like a poor man's poor man's Brook Lopez a little bit. Like he can
Mm-hmm.
hit the perimeter shots at a very, very high clip. Honestly, he's like even less streaky than Brook as a perimeter shooter. Hits free throws at a very high rate, decent rebounder. Again, with it, when you're thinking about JJ's system, honestly, for a big man, like I'd say he's an elite passer.
Yep.
And he does a little bit of everything. He's not super explosive off the floor, so he's not going to run up the block numbers. But his hands are so good. It's sort of like the Nance thing I was just talking about. Like he gets
Yeah.
strips. He's always mucking things up. Again, it's like the thing about Olynyk that's always impressed me. The last couple of years when he was with Utah, whenever we met, and obviously we played them 8 times the last couple of years, right? So it's like whenever we match up against him, you always feel like AD should be able to do more against him than he does. But Olynyk just holds his own, and he's always been like this. The only thing that scares me is like we need guys who can play, right? So
Yeah.
we don't know how serious the back injury is. I don't know, yeah, it all comes down to how serious the back injury
Yeah.
is and whether he's, the physical and all the medicals check out. But to your point, I mean, if you're looking for one big and you don't want to move Hayes or, you think Koloko can suffice as the third sort of option, Olynyk makes a lot more sense to me than Jonas.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So that pretty much does it for my list of marginal trade candidates that the Lakers can look at if they want to execute a part one trade before their bigger trade using the first round pick, D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura. And I think a lot of these, if not all of them, are pretty realistic. It all depends on how Rob Pelinka is able to operate and converse with these other GMs and what opportunities arise as we hit December 15th. But yeah, with that said, thank you guys for listening. Follow us on X at Lakers Legacy Pod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Lakers Legacy Pod as well. And please remember to give us a 5-star rating and review on the Apple Podcast app and Spotify. And with that said, Tommy, I will catch you later.
Peace.
See ya.